She gave birth to 4 sons in the slums of Lagos. A week later, tragedy struck, or so she thought. Left alone to raise them in a world that mocked her, she fought against all odds. Years passed. The boys grew into men, and their name began to echo across the nation. Just when success seemed certain, a figure from the shadows returned. Someone she never thought she'd see again. What happens when the past you buried walks back into your life? Welcome to the Judge Stories. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel to help us grow, and tell us which country you're watching from in the comments. The night Grace went into labor, the entire slum seemed to echo with her pain. Rain hammered against the zinc roof of their tiny room, dripping through holes and puddling at the corners. The midwife, an elderly woman who lived 3 doors away, barked instructions as Grace clutched the torn bedsheet beneath her. With a final cry, the first child slipped into the world. Then another, and finally a 4th. For cries pierced the darkness. Quadruplets, Grace, soaked in sweat and tears, reached weakly for them. Her husband, Gabriel, stood frozen, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. 4, he whispered hoarsely. 4 at once. The midwife smiled wearily. A blessing, she said, tying off the last umbilical cord. But Gabriel's eyes betrayed no joy. He turned away, rubbing his head, muttering words only he could hear. Grace, though exhausted, cradled the fragile bundles against her chest. Their tiny fists waved, their cries filling the shabby room. She felt both overwhelmed and fiercely protective. Joseph, Emeka, David, John, she whispered, naming them one by one. My sons, my gift from God. But when she looked up, her husband's face had hardened. The worry lines on his brow deepened, his lips tight. How will we feed them, Grace? How will we survive? We can't even afford food for 2, and now for more mouths. Grace's heart sank, but she forced a smile. We will manage. God gave them to us. He will make a way. Gabriel said nothing. He stepped outside into the rain, his shadow swallowed by the night. Grace held the children closer, whispering softly to calm them. She didn't know it yet, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one already brewing inside her husband's heart. As the quadruplets slept in a row beside her, Grace closed her eyes, whispering a prayer into the leaking roof. Lord, give me strength. If he won't stand by me, let me be enough for them. Outside, Gabriel leaned against the wall, staring into the dark alley where sewage water flowed like a crooked river. His fists clenched. To Grace, he was silent. But in his heart, a dangerous thought had already begun to take root. A thought that would change all their lives forever. The first week after the birth was a blur of sleepless nights and endless cries. Grace staggered through each day, rocking one baby while the other 3 fussed for her touch. Their small rooms smelled of damp cloth and baby powder, and though she was exhausted, her heart swelled with love each time she looked at their tiny faces. Gabriel, however, grew more distant. He paced the alleys of the slum with a hollow stare, avoiding his neighbors' curious questions. When he came home, it was only to complain about the noise, the lack of food, the hopelessness of their lives. Grace begged him for patience. We will survive this together, she said one night, her voice cracking. They are our children. They need us both. But Gabriel was already slipping away. One humid evening, he told Grace he was heading to the farm plots by the canal, a place where men often went to fetch wood or scavenge scraps. Grace nodded wearily, focused on soothing David, who wouldn't stop crying. Hours later, loud voices filled the night. Neighbors ran through the alleys shouting, Something has happened at the canal. Grace rushed out, heart hammering. They said Gabriel had slipped, fallen into the dark, foul water, and drowned. A pair of slippers, his slippers, floated by the bank. The men who dragged the area with sticks found nothing. The current was too strong. Grace collapsed, clutching her chest. No, no, she cried, her wail echoing into the night. Neighbors shook their heads with pity. Some muttered that poverty had claimed another victim. Others whispered that she was cursed, First quadruplets, now a husband swallowed by the slum. For 3 days Grace mourned. Her eyes swollen, her body weak. She could barely move, but the babies wailed, needing her. Between tears, she nursed them, whispering, "Your father is gone, but I am here. I will not leave you." What Grace didn't know was that Gabriel had watched from the shadows that night. He crouched in the reeds, shivering as the neighbors cried out his name. He heard his wife scream his death into the night and felt a strange satisfaction. In his mind, he was free from responsibility, free from poverty, free from the weight of 4 sons he never wanted. As dawn broke, he slipped away from the slum, a living ghost. Grace believed she was a widow, but in truth she was alone because of a lie. The news of Gabriel's death spread quickly through the slum. Some shook their heads in pity when they passed Grace's door. Others only sneered. "Quadruplets with no father? She's finished?" A woman hissed one morning, balancing a basin of tomatoes on her head. Laughter followed, sharp as broken glass. Grace tried to block it out. Her days blurred into a cycle of hunger, exhaustion, and cries. With no money, she often boiled plain pap, thinning it with water so the babies could have something in their bellies. At night, when they wailed together, she pressed her hands against her ears and whispered through tears, "God, help me. Just help me through tonight." Yet amid the cruelty, small kindnesses flickered. The old woman who lived across the alley would sometimes slip Grace a handful of beans, saying, "For the children." A market man once pressed an orange into her palm, winking, "They will need the strength." Those tiny mercies kept her afloat. Still, the weight of raising 4 infants alone was crushing. Grace tied one baby to her back, another to her chest, and laid the other 2 on cloth by her feet while she washed clothes for neighbors. As she scrubbed, her body ached, but her eyes burned with determination. Each coin she earned went to milk and medicine. One evening, as she rocked them to sleep, Grace looked at their faces in the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Identical, yet each had his own tiny features. Joseph with the wide, curious eyes, Emeka with the small birthmark on his chin, David restless even in sleep, and John the quietest, his fingers curled tight around hers. "You are all I have," she whispered, kissing each forehead. "And I swear, I will never let you down." Outside, neighbors gossiped that she wouldn't last 6 months, that one of the children would surely die. But Grace only tightened her grip on her sons. She knew the world expected her to fail. That knowledge hardened inside her, becoming a vow. If she had to beg, crawl, or starve, her sons would live, and they would rise. What she didn't know was that this vow, whispered in a one-room shack in the heart of a Lagos slum, would one day echo far beyond her wildest dreams. Years slipped by in the slum, and the quadruplets grew from tiny bundles into restless boys with endless questions. Grace, though worn thin by labor and hunger, carried herself with quiet strength. Every morning before dawn, she woke them with gentle taps. "Joseph, Emeka, David, John, up. Say your prayers." The neighbors often mocked her strictness. "They are children, not soldiers." One woman laughed, watching as the boys scrubbed their faces with cold water from a plastic basin. But Grace ignored them. She had learned one thing through suffering. Without discipline, poverty would swallow her sons whole. She kept them busy. If she was washing clothes for clients, the boys were beside her, rinsing or hanging them. If she went to the market, they carried basins. At night, by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, she made them read borrowed textbooks. Sometimes their stomachs growled, but she would encourage them. "Knowledge will feed you longer than bread." And slowly the fruits began to show. Teachers at the local public school marveled at how quickly the boys learned. "Sharp minds," one remarked. "They will go far if they don't get dragged down by this environment." Grace's chest swelled with pride each time she heard such words. Yet life in the slum was not kind. Some children mocked the quadruplets, calling them fatherless for. Once, after a fight broke out, Grace arrived at the school gate to find David with a split lip. She wiped the blood with her wrapper and knelt before him. "Never answer them with fists," she said firmly. Prove them wrong with success. Despite the hardships, laughter still filled their tiny home. On evenings when Grace managed to cook beans or a small pot of rice, the boys ate eagerly, teasing one another, their voices rising above the constant noise of the slum. Grace would sit back, watching them with tears she tried to hide. In her heart, she often whispered, "If only your father could see you now." But the thought quickly turned bitter. As far as she was concerned, Gabriel was gone forever, and she would make sure her sons never felt abandoned again. What she didn't know was that Gabriel was alive, living quietly in another part of Lagos, unaware that the seeds Grace was planting in those boys would one day grow into trees strong enough to shake the nation. By their teenage years, the Quadruplets had become the pride of their community. Grace's one-room home, though poor and crowded, shone with something few households in the slum carried: hope. Each morning, the boys walked to school in neatly patched uniforms, their notebooks clutched tightly as though they held treasure. And in a way, they did. At school, their brilliance was undeniable. Joseph's sharp mind made him a natural leader in debates. Emeka solved complex equations faster than his teachers could write them. David, bold and restless, excelled in science experiments, while John had a quiet gift for argument and law. Their names appeared on honor rolls, their pictures framed on notice boards. Teachers shook their heads in wonder. For geniuses, from one mother. Grace beamed with pride each time she heard it. She often said, "I cannot give them wealth, but I will give them values." And values she gave: respect for others, fear of God, and the discipline to chase knowledge even on an empty stomach. The day their admission letters arrived was the happiest and saddest day of Grace's life. She unfolded the crisp envelopes with trembling hands. 2 of her sons had been admitted into medicine and surgery, another into civil engineering, the 4th into law. The boys danced around her, hugging one another, their laughter filling the small room like fireworks. But as Grace read the details, her smile faltered. School fees, textbooks, accommodation. The costs ran into hundreds of thousands. She sat down hard on the bed, the letters slipping from her fingers. Tears blurred her vision. That night, as the boys slept, Grace knelt by the kerosene lamp and whispered prayers she could barely form. "Lord, don't let their dreams die because of me. I have carried them this far. Please, make a way." Her voice broke into sobs that shook her shoulders. The Quadruplets stirred. Half awake, they exchanged looks in the dim light. They had never seen their mother cry like this. Quietly, they listened, realizing for the first time that love alone could not pay for their future. The next morning, they pretended not to notice her swollen eyes. But inside, a vow had formed. If money was the barrier between them and destiny, then they would find it, even if it meant putting their dreams on hold. And so, what should have been their first step into greatness became instead the beginning of another test, choosing sacrifice over ambition. For days, the admission letters lay neatly folded beneath Grace's pillow. She touched them often, as though their crispness alone could keep hope alive. Each time she looked at her sons, her heart swelled with pride, and then ached with despair. Dreams so close, yet locked behind a wall of money she could never climb. The boys noticed her silence. She smiled less, her laughter forced. At night, she lingered by the lamp, staring at the papers with vacant eyes. "Mama, what is it?" Joseph once asked, but she waved him away. "Nothing, my son. Just tired." One night, long after they had lain down to sleep, Grace's whispered voice floated through the dark. The boys stirred quietly and listened. She knelt by the bed, her hands clasped tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "God, I don't ask for riches, just a chance for them. Don't let their light be wasted because of poverty. If I have to suffer, but let their path shine." Her voice broke into sobs. The boys froze in their mats, their throats tight. It was the first time they fully understood the weight their mother carried alone. The next morning, before she woke, they gathered outside the shack. David clenched his fist. "We cannot go to school now. Not like this. Mama will kill herself trying." Emeka nodded. We defer. We work. We save. One day we'll go back. Joseph looked at John, the quietest of them. What do you think? John's jaw tightened. I think Mama has given her life for us. It's time we give ours for her. When Grace awoke, she found them already dressed. Not for school but for work. They explained gently, placing their hands on hers. Mama, don't cry. We will still become great. But first, we must help you carry this load. Her tears fell freely. She wanted to protest, but the resolve in their young eyes silenced her. And so it was decided. The sons who had earned their place in lecture halls would instead step into the world of menial labor. Bricklaying, hawking, carrying loads in markets. That evening, as they walked out together for their first day of work, Grace stood in the doorway watching. Her heart was breaking, yet swelling with pride all at once. The slum had expected her family to collapse. But instead, they were building something no one could yet see. Resilience forged in sacrifice. Life shifted into a new rhythm. Each morning, the quadruplets split across the slum in search of work. Joseph hauled cement blocks at construction sites. Emeka pushed wheelbarrows of sand until his palms blistered. David carried heavy crates for traders at the market, while John hawked cold sachets of water in Lagos traffic. They returned home each night with sweat-drenched shirts and a few crumpled Naira notes, handing everything to Grace without complaint. The neighbors watched in disbelief. These boys should be in university, one man muttered. Yet they work like laborers. Others mocked them, but the brothers ignored it. Their eyes were fixed on a dream bigger than ridicule. After 2 years, their savings were pitiful compared to what they needed. But hope lingered. They often huddled together at night, whispering plans of a small restaurant they wanted to call 4 Square Meal. It was a dream born of hunger. They wanted no one else to feel the emptiness they had endured. One humid evening, as the sun dipped low and the slum's alleys filled with smoke from cooking fires, fate intervened. The brothers were walking home, their bodies aching from a long day, when they saw it. A gleaming black SUV stuck deep in the mud near the canal road. Its headlights flickered as the engine roared uselessly. Beside the car stood a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed, gold earrings glinting under the streetlight. Madame Veronica, though they did not yet know her name. Her face was tight with frustration as passers-by laughed cruelly. See the rich, one man jeered. They only remember us when they are stuck. Another added, let her call her fellow big men to come and push her out. They walked away, leaving her stranded. The quadruplets exchanged glances. Without a word, they dropped their bags and ran forward. Their hands dug into the mud, their shoulders pressed against the SUV. Muscles strained, mud splattered, and with one heave, the car jolted free. The woman gasped, covering her mouth. 4 of you, identical? She whispered, astonished. She looked from one boy to the next as though she had seen a miracle. Pulling out a sleek business card, she pressed it into Joseph's hand. Meet me next Saturday. Same time. Bring your brothers. I want to hear your story. The quadruplets stood breathless, their clothes filthy, but something in her eyes told them this was no ordinary encounter. Grace had always told them destiny hides in unexpected places. That night, walking home under the flickering streetlights, they wondered if destiny had just arrived in the form of a stranded billionaire. Saturday came, and the quadruplets wore their cleanest clothes, shirts neatly ironed, trousers patched but spotless. Grace insisted on saying a prayer before they left. Go with humility, she told them, tying her wrapper tighter. Speak the truth of your lives. God will do the rest. They arrived at a quiet, upscale cafe on the mainland, a world far removed from the slum's chaos. Madame Veronica was already waiting, her poise commanding respect. She gestured for them to sit, her sharp eyes scanning their identical faces with fascination. I have lived many years, she began slowly, but I have never met quadruplets. That day in the slum, you pushed my car while others mocked me. Tell me, who are you? Joseph spoke first, his voice steady. We are sons of Grace. She raised us alone after our father died. We gained admission into university, medicine, engineering, law, but we could not afford it. So we worked. Emeka leaned forward. We saved what little we could. For 2 years, every naira went into a small dream we share. What dream? Veronica asked. David's eyes shone. A restaurant. We call it 4 square meal. We want to serve food that fills both stomach and soul. We know hunger, madam. We want no one else to feel it. There was silence. Then John added softly, we may be poor, but we are ready to work harder than anyone you know. Madam Veronica sat back, studying them. Their words weren't rehearsed. They carried the weight of lived experience. Finally, she smiled faintly. I admire courage, but dreams need wings. I will give you mine. From her handbag, she produced a contract with it 40 million naira check. She said firmly, I'll take 20% equity. You handle the groundwork. I'll open the doors to markets, investors, and customers. But the sweat, the sacrifice, must remain yours. The brothers stared at each other in disbelief. Their hands trembled as they signed the papers. Veronica leaned in, her tone softer. Don't make me regret this. The world laughed at me in that slum. You reminded me why we should never despise small beginnings. Make this count. As they left the cafe, the quadruplets could hardly contain their joy. Grace cried when she saw the documents. For the first time in years, hope tasted real. And so, with Veronica's backing and their mother's blessing, 4 square meal was born. What began as a dream whispered in a dark shack was now about to change the course of their lives, and the lives of countless others. The signboard was small, painted with borrowed brushes, but the words gleamed proudly in red and gold. 4 square meal. The restaurant sat in a modest corner shop on the mainland, its tiled floor still smelling of fresh polish, the counters stacked with borrowed pots and second-hand chairs. It was humble, but to Grace and her sons, it was a palace. On opening day, the quadruplets worked like soldiers. Joseph handled the accounts, Emeka ran the kitchen, David greeted customers with his restless energy, and John managed supplies and orders. Grace moved among them, tying aprons, offering advice, her eyes shining with both nerves and pride. But the early days were brutal. Customers trickled in slowly, many skeptical. Who are these slum boys trying to feed Lagos? Some sneered. A few meals were sent back at first, too salty, too spicy, not hot enough. Each mistake cut like a blade, but instead of breaking, the brothers stayed late into the night, fixing recipes, improving service, and promising one another never to quit. Madame Veronica visited often, her sharp eyes noting everything. She never interfered, but her presence reminded them. Failure was not an option. Then came the turning point. One rainy evening, a bus conductor wandered in, dripping wet. He ordered a plate of jollof rice. The aroma filled the small space, rich with smoke and spice. He ate quietly, then looked up with wide eyes. This is different. The next day he returned with 3 friends. Within a week, word spread in the area. 4 square meals served food that tasted like home. Soon, taxis lined up outside. Market women came during lunch breaks. Students filled the chairs, laughing and taking photos. The once empty tables were never bare again. At night, after the shutters came down, Grace sat with her sons in the quiet shop. The boys counted the day's earnings, not much compared to the millions they dreamed of, but more than they had ever held in their hands. Grace smiled through tears. You see, she whispered, God answers. What began as a trickle of customers soon became a stream. And though the slum still remembered them as the fatherless 4, Lagos was beginning to call them something new. The Miracle Brothers. And this was only the beginning. Within a year, the little corner shop that once struggled to fill a handful of chairs could no longer contain the crowd. Customers queued outside before opening, spilling onto the street. Newspapers picked up the story. Quadruplet brothers serve Lagos a miracle meal. Photos of the identical young men in aprons became a talking point across the city. Madame Veronica, true to her word, stepped in with her network. Billboards appeared in Surulere, Yaba, and Acacia, bright posters with the slogan, "Four brothers, one dream, endless meals." Her connections brought in investors, and soon the brothers had enough funding to open a second branch. But success came with pressure. Expansion meant longer hours, bigger responsibilities, and higher risks. Joseph often stayed up all night balancing books. Emeka experimented tirelessly in the kitchen to keep recipes consistent. David, ever restless, clashed with staff when orders piled up. And John, the quiet one, shouldered the stress of supply chains, often walking miles to negotiate fair prices from markets. Some days, Grace worried they would break under the weight. But each time tempers flared, the brothers reminded themselves of why they started: to fight hunger, to honor their mother's sacrifice. By their third year, For Square Meal had 5 bustling outlets across Lagos. Young professionals stopped by after work. Students flocked in for affordable meals. Even celebrities were spotted eating there. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #ForSquareMeal and #MiracleBrothers. One evening, as Grace sat in the office of their newest branch in Victoria Island, she gazed at the glowing sign outside. Tears filled her eyes. The same woman who had once stretched pap with water so her sons could survive was now mother to 4 rising stars in Lagos business. But as their name grew, so did the whispers of destiny. For every glowing headline, there was a shadow watching quietly. What began as a single modest shop in Lagos soon spilled beyond the city's borders. By their 5th year in business, 4 Square Meal had branches in Ibadan, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Enugu, and beyond. Their red and gold logo became a familiar sight across Nigeria. The Quadruplets worked like men possessed. Joseph handled investors and financial planning with the precision of a seasoned banker. Emeka, now a master of flavors, created menus that blended tradition with innovation: smoky jollof, spicy pepper soup, fluffy ajij bread paired with stews that reminded customers of home. David became the public face, brimming with charisma, giving interviews and speaking at youth events. And John, quiet but firm, built a supply chain that kept their kitchens stocked across 10 states. The nation took notice. Magazines called them Nigeria's miracle entrepreneurs. Newspapers splashed their photos with headlines like, "From Slum to Billionaire Brand." Even international business channels began to request interviews. But the moment that changed everything came during a primetime television feature. The camera panned across their bustling Victoria Island branch, showing the identical brothers working side by side. Then it cut to Grace, now dressed in soft Ankara, her eyes proud but humble, speaking about sacrifice, faith, and resilience. Somewhere in a cramped room on the outskirts of Lagos, a man froze as he watched the screen. His hands trembled, his eyes wide. The faces were unmistakable. For boys, grown into men, and the woman he had once abandoned, alive and radiant. Gabriel's heart pounded. He had buried his name years ago under the lie of death, but now the past stood on national television, undeniable. His lips trembled as he whispered, "My sons, my Grace." For hours he paced the room, torn between shame and longing. The world celebrated the Quadruplets as a miracle, but he knew the truth. He had left them to drown in poverty. And yet, something inside him burned. A desperate need to reclaim his place, to ask for forgiveness, or perhaps to share in the empire they had built. As the feature ended with Grace's tearful smile, Gabriel made his decision. He would return. The question was, would they receive him as a father, or as a ghost who had no right to come back? It was a quiet Sunday evening when the knock came. Grace was in the living room of their new home, a modest but elegant house in Lekki, bought from the sweat of her son's success. The Quadruplets were scattered around, joking after dinner, when the knock sounded again. Firm, insistent, David opened the door, and froze. There he stood, older, thinner, but unmistakable. The man from faded photographs. The man Grace had mourned, buried in her heart, and cursed in her prayers. Gabriel. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Grace staggered to her feet, her hand clutching her chest. "No," she whispered. This cannot be. Her knees weakened, and John rushed to steady her. Gabriel's eyes glistened with tears. Grace, my wife, my sons, look at you now. You've all grown into men. Rage surged in Grace's chest, drowning her shock. My wife. Her voice shook like thunder. You faked your death, Gabriel. Left me in the gutter with 4 babies to feed. Do you know the nights I starved? The insults I endured? The blood I nearly coughed out trying to keep them alive? Her words struck like blows, but Gabriel did not flinch. He fell to his knees on the polished floor. I was a coward. I saw poverty and fear and I ran. Forgive me, Grace. Forgive me, my sons. I want nothing, only your mercy. The quadruplets stood frozen, torn. Joseph's fists clenched at his sides. You left Mama to suffer, he snapped. Emeka's voice trembled. And now you come back because we are successful? David stepped forward, conflicted, his restless eyes darting between his father and his mother. But he is still our blood, he whispered. John said nothing, his silence heavy with thought. Grace's tears streamed unchecked. She pointed to the door, her voice breaking. You are dead to me, Gabriel. Dead. I buried you once. Don't make me bury you again. But even as her words echoed, the quadruplets exchanged uneasy looks. Half their hearts burned with fury. The other half longed for answers. And Gabriel, still on his knees, whispered one last plea. Don't shut me out, please. Let me prove I am still your father. The house fell into a storm of silence, each soul battling its own war. The air in the living room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Gabriel remained kneeling on the floor, his head bowed, while Grace stood trembling, her face wet with tears. Get out, she said coldly. You do not belong here. But David stepped forward, his voice breaking. Mama, he's our father. Joseph snapped around, eyes blazing. Father? A man who fakes his death and abandons his wife with 4 newborns is no father. Joseph, David began, but Emeka cut in, his voice sharp with anger. Do not defend him. You weren't the one who carried sacks of sand until your back nearly broke. You weren't the one who watched Mama faint from hunger. John, quiet as ever, finally spoke. His words were calm but pierced like glass. He is guilty, no doubt. But the truth is also this. If not for him, we would not exist. What do we do with that? The room erupted into argument. David sided with John, saying forgiveness was not weakness but healing. Joseph and Emeka stood firmly with Grace, insisting Gabriel had forfeited every right to call himself their father. Grace herself turned away, covering her ears as though she could block out the sound of her divided sons. Gabriel lifted his face, tears streaking down his cheeks. Fight me if you must. Hate me. I deserve it. But do not let me die without your forgiveness. Grace's voice cracked like thunder. You died long ago, Gabriel. The day you walked into that canal and left me to rot, you buried yourself. Do not ask me to resurrect you. The quadruplets fell silent. The weight of her words pressed heavily on them. The man kneeling before them was a ghost. Alive, yet unwanted, flesh and blood yet banished by betrayal. Finally, Joseph spoke for all the anger in the room. Leave before I make you leave. Gabriel's shoulders sagged. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. His eyes swept over his sons one last time, the men he had abandoned as infants, then lingered on Grace, who turned away. He walked out into the night, the door clicking shut behind him. Inside, silence reigned, for brothers stood side by side, yet divided in spirit. Grace sank into her chair, whispering, "This house will not break because of him." But deep down, they all knew. Gabriel's return had cracked something that might never fully mend.